Today I am very excited to welcome my friend, Dr. Andrew Muir Wood, who is the founder of Muir Wood Co. Andrew is and Muir Wood Co is a boutique research agency and strategy consultancy in London that's worked with clients like Deliveroo, Google, Mozilla, and IKEA, to name but a few. And we'll be discussing a couple of more examples today. Andrew is, of course, a doctor, as evidenced by the Dr. Andrew Muir Wood, and he has a PhD from Cambridge in design and product evolution and a background in product design engineering. And so he has a long history in blurring lines between being a UX researcher and many other things. And today we're going to be investigating and discussing some of those blurred lines, which I'm really excited to share with you all. And coming out of today, what we're looking to build is some new mental models around what's possible when AI removes the traditional handoff between research, design, and engineering. And we've got some very practical, tactical examples to share with you, and learning a little bit more about how Andrew is approaching those new blurred lines in a world where AI is enabling researchers to do a lot more than we were able to previously. But before we dive in, if we haven't met yet, I do recognize some of the names in the chat, so fantastic to see some old friends here. But if we haven't met yet, my name is Harry Thomas. I am Chief of Staff at Great Question, and I was previously a UX researcher at Facebook in London, which is actually where Andrew and our paths crossed. So I've known Andrew for 5+ years. I'm really excited to have him as a guest today on our webinar. If you are unfamiliar with Great Question, we are an AI user research platform that helps teams recruit participants, run any method from interviews to surveys to prototype tests, and build a research repository that puts real customer evidence into every decision, whether that's in your PID, your design review, or your AI tools through our brand new MCP integration. So if you're not yet using Great Questions MCP integration, I encourage you to check that out. And Carly might be able to put a link to one of our recent blog posts on how that works in the chat. But that's enough from me. Let's get into our conversation with Andrew. So, Andrew, your career has never really fit in one box, and you've obviously taken some divergences along the way, went away, did your PhD at Cambridge, and have come back. And now you run a research consultancy, but you work with a really broad range of clients doing a number of different activities week to week. And you're building prototypes in Claude Code, and you're working on acquisition strategies, and you're working on e-commerce websites, and you're working on, startups and established organizations. And so maybe you could start today's session just by telling everybody a little bit about your background and your journey to arriving at founding Muir Wood Co.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me on, Harry, and great to meet everyone. So yes, I've always been a bit of a creative generalist and kind of a multitasker. For example, I did my PhD was a mixed methods PhD. My supervisor was always grumbling that I was trying to do all of the methods rather than just kind of picking the choice few. And even while I was doing my PhD, I was selling printed clothing to other students at the university. So there's kind of always been a little bit of a kind of entrepreneurial hustle. And after the PhD, I did a bit of consulting. I started my own consulting business called Zombie Labs. I ran a collective of young creatives doing events at music festivals and stuff. And then I went into startups. And I think that startup world kind of suited my way of working, which because the job description changes every 3 months, as you know, going through the sort of early stages. And so even as a research lead, you're going on sales calls, you're making video content, you're making slides, kind of whatever's needed each week. And I think putting yourself in those situations starts to help you to triangulate, to start to see sort of connections between different things and unlock opportunities. So I think that sort of multimodal world has always been something that I've enjoyed. And then after my time in startups, I felt like a good way of channeling sort of restlessness was to become a consultant, because then I could jump from project to project and sort of have an impact on that project, but then also, close it off and move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, you picked up on a couple of different research related skills there in sales, which I think is an underappreciated skill in the research realm, where we need to be selling our research findings to folks internally, and there's a lot of stakeholder management. And then you've got this kind of design component. I'm very keen to hear more about your t-shirts and the things that you were selling whilst at university, but maybe on another session. And so for you, you're talking about kind of this dissolution of boundaries and these variable skill sets that you've had to bring to the fore. How has that changed over time? And what do you find yourself doing more of now that you weren't previously as a researcher, as your practice has evolved and your agency has matured?
Well, there's a lot more selling at the moment. It's definitely the world has changed, as many people in the audience who work in research know, that it's the demand for it and the shape of the projects has evolved greatly. 5 years ago, we didn't have any of these platforms like yours, and we had a huge amount of work, and lots of hiring, and then that kind of dropped off. And so definitely selling has always been a part of it, but then also evolving the shape of and kind of repackaging the research. There's a totally different shape of project that I'm doing now compared with 5 years ago.
Yeah, I bet. And that's actually a perfect segue into a project that you recently completed for an e-commerce client. So maybe you could tell everybody here a little bit about that. I understand that there was some layout and navigation work, but you were able to implement Claude in a pretty unique way to push that project forward for your clients.
Yeah, so I mean, a good example of the evolution of the kinds of work that we have been doing in 5 years ago is almost all sort of product discovery that we were doing. We were working with product development teams, whereas now the majority of the work we're doing is actually more with marketing teams, and we're still doing discovery, but it's more like buyer discovery. And this particular client is an e-commerce company, and the work that we are doing combines a bit of pre-purchase discovery and then some UX testing of the sort of buying experience to understand obstacles sort of before and during the purchase. So it's not kind of like detailed conversion rate optimization or sort of usability. It's a bit more, it's a sort of a combo, a holistic combo. And this particular client, they're mid-sized. They're not super well resourced for design, and they have no researchers on board, and that's often a situation that we find ourselves in. But they had some ideas about things they wanted to change, and they were hoping for us to test along the way. And they kind of gave us a couple of static wireframes that they were kind of, can you see if people like this? But the wireframes didn't sort of do justice to the sort of nuanced differences between, I could tell what they wanted, but so I thought, why don't I just see if I can rip their website into Claude Code and actually just rebuild what they're trying to do, but in an actual sort of interactive prototype that is based on code. Because there's no Figma, there's no design system, there's no that we can't kind of rapidly draw from existing resources here. And so as an experiment, I just ripped their mobile site and then rebuilt it, and then made the changes to the navigation and sort of layout and a little bit of terminology, kind of one by one. And then I was able to present that to the customers during the research, and it was very realistic looking and very sort of similar to what they'd experienced recently. But it allowed us to sort of dive into the detail.
Really interesting. And in as much as I'm interested in how the participants received that experience, how was that information received by your client and the designers that you were working with? Was that were they supportive of you taking those actions in order to progress the research, or did it feel a little bit like, you encroaching on something which they might have traditionally owned?
It was going beyond what they asked for. So I think they would have been happy for us to just find a way to test these static prototypes. But it was something I was interested in doing anyway. And so they were, when I sent them the mock-up, they were very pleased. But it wasn't something that was kind of part of the package. And I guess I talked before about the package. What is a package now, as a researcher? And so it was kind of over delivering for this project, but actually it's going to get us better insights. And so we're more like, I've got more confidence in the data that's coming off the back of testing these prototypes rather than just a JPEG. And so that should then produce a more confident finding at the end of the project, which should produce a clearer kind of ROI from working with us, which should then lead to them wanting us to come back and do more work, or a case study that other clients can be like, well, I want my buying journey to be optimized like this. And so it's kind of worth doing.
Yeah, really interesting. And can you speak to me a little bit more? You said it should give you more confidence in the findings and the insights that you derive from those sessions. How would you articulate the delta between what would have been possible with a traditional JPEG or a PDF versus what you were able to do with an interactive prototype? Like, where is the margin and the additional detail that you're able to provide?
Yeah, well, so a lot of the time when we get given a PDF or a JPEG, and I'm sure this is kind of some of the researchers on the call are going to get PTSD from hearing this, is that you just get given it and just get told, test if people like this, and you just get given one thing, and it's like, compared to what? Like, what are we like it? It's so subjective, and there's nothing to compare to, and so. What we were able to do is kind of break down the changes that they were suggesting in that prototype, and some of them were language, and some of them were about the layout, and some of them were about value. And so make sure that during the interview we are sort of separately testing those things, and also testing them against how things are currently, or against a competitor, or against something. So there's always a comparison that we can make that gives us confidence that what people are saying isn't just a kind of, it seems fine. Like it's much more like, yes, this is better than this other one because for these reasons. And my buying journey, I'm in a hurry. This feels like it's going to be a faster way of doing what I wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely. But it also sounds like a lot of work. It's a lot of additional work that you have willingly taken on. And in your context, as an agency, you are providing service over and above what the client was expecting in this particular context. But for our friends and colleagues who are joining us today, who are working in more established environments, the thought of having to create a prototype and then create these variables in order to test and tease apart the difference in the language versus the functionality, like, how do you go about justifying that additional work? And is that something that everybody should be expected to do now?
I think, as we gradually implement AI into our process, we are finding some things can be done much faster than they could be done before. Certain aspects of the research process, some analysis part, digging out quotes and things like that, so much faster. And so which means you've got two choices. You kind of just do it faster, or you do more, maybe do some of the analysis that you would never have had time or budget for. You can go into a lot more granular detail. So I think that the time that we spend on things shifts around, and it's you can you can do this very quickly. You can just, like a lot of the prototypes we receive feel like they've been put together quite quickly. But actually, just because you can put a prototype together in 2 minutes doesn't mean you should. But there's this kind of space. It used to take a day to make a prototype, and now you can do it in 2 minutes. But actually, why don't we take an hour and make make it really good? And then that's the sort of the rebalance, the repackaging of our role in this, because ultimately I'm just trying to get better findings. So for me, it's sort of time well spent to improve the quality of the findings, rather than just saying I was just testing what I was given, and it's not my problem.
Yeah. It is an interesting dynamic in that it's no longer justifiable to say, well, I actually don't know how our customers would interact with this because all I got was a PDF. That's no longer a justifiable excuse. You need to be able to speak eloquently to the different journeys that people are taking through the product. The expectation, certainly Act Great Question has shifted enormously in terms of the interactivity of the prototypes and the ideas that we're testing on a daily basis. And I've just asked in the chat here, so who's creating prototypes as part of their research workflows today? And we've had 4 thumbs up. So it certainly seems to be catching on, and more people are doing this, which is fantastic. But Andrew, maybe you can talk us through a second example today on a recent EdTech project you had and how that came to pass. And in particular, I'm really interested in diving into kind of the stakeholder management component for you, and how those lines blur and how you interact with the other stakeholders in this project.
Yeah, so this one spiraled. So it was a pre-launch stage startup, so very, very early stage, and that we were looking at a kind of a type of tuition, and our initial discovery work revealed that there was this kind of clear sequence of jobs to be done for families as they went through a certain stage of their children's education, and that this could lend itself to a service that kind of coaches them throughout that time. And I could start to picture what this could look like in my mind. And we had all this data. We had all these people saying, oh, and this month I had this pain point, and then 2 months later I had this pain point. And so it just started to kind of come together. And so I thought, why don't I just, as an artifact for just showing how it fits together, put together a cheeky platform. So just started noodling on Claude Code, and started putting together, what would people see when they arrive, and what would happen 1 month in, and then they probably have this consultation, and then this would appear, and then this would appear, and it came together remarkably easily because we had done a bunch of discovery already. So we weren't going in cold and just kind of guessing what people want. And then I was like, this would make a cool prototype to go back to some of those people we did the discovery on and kind of say, well, you said this was your problem. How, what do you think about this compared with how you're doing it currently? And then I thought, well, why don't I add a secret customization screen where I can customize the prototype with the family's names and a little bit about where they live, what school they're at, whatever. And so it's just can we just prime this prototype with a bunch of information that's going to make it feel even more real for them, so that when we show it to them, we're going to get that they don't have to suspend disbelief. They don't have to pretend that their child's name is Frankie or whatever we used to do with prototypes. And there's no lorem ipsum. It's not even AI filler copy. It's genuinely relevant stuff that's for their region. And that came together very quickly. And then I showed it to the founders, and they were like, a few things happened. One was they were like, I think we could probably just sell this to immediately. But they also forced them to start asking, answering questions about the model. So they were starting to think through how is this actually going to work, and how are we going to resource all of this, and there's all of these things that need to happen along the journey, and what's that look like, and what can we charge for this? And so it became an artifact not just for testing on customers, but also for testing on the stakeholders to get a higher level of conversation from them.
Really interesting. And we've got a good question from Max in the chat, which I want to return to in just a moment. But before we do that, you mentioned building the prototypes based upon prior research or a prior understanding of who the customers were and some customer discovery work you had done. What does that synthesis look like? Is it just a matter of kind of piping that information into Claude whilst you're generating the prototype, or is there manual analysis that you're doing, or ingestion of that information? How does the repository of information factor into prototype creation for you?
Yeah, so we do use AI to help us with analysis, but the analysis is fairly traditional. So it's all of the affinity mapping, clustering, building journey maps, understanding different personas, different trade-offs. Certain different families have different attitudes and behaviors around their child's education, et cetera. So that was a distinct phase of the project that I would call fairly traditional discovery. What we did do in that discovery phase was we did present a different kind of prototype to people, but they were more like artifacts, like conversation starters, to start to get a feel for the idea of subscription, or some various aspects of what we were trying to do, but without going into any kind of detail, just to see if they would react really angrily against it, or or if it was something that they're already doing in another sort of parallel world.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that makes sense. Okay, so we've got these kind of distinct phases, and so there's an appropriate time to build a high-res prototype, and maybe phases where it's less appropriate. That makes sense.
Absolutely.
And so I've got a question here from Max. If you revised a prototype mid-study based on early consistent feedback, how would you approach a recommendation when your participant counts are split across two versions?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, there's an interpretive approach that with all qualitative research, the numbers are already quite small. I think that if you've done 2 or 3 interviews and you just spot something that is just such a howling issue with your prototype, or with if you're testing your existing website and everyone's fixating on this one UX problem, and you have an opportunity to remove that, so then we can actually go one step further and see what are the other problems, then that's what I'm sort of talking about here in terms of the change. What I don't suggest is making a sort of a complete revision of the entire prototype. It would make sense to do that, as part of another sprint. So you would sort of complete one phase of research, and then with the appropriate number of people, you're seeing sort of consistent themes emerging, and then you're pausing, and then you're making those changes. So yeah, the revisions are much more just tactically removing any silly obstacles to people's comprehension of sort of the bigger picture of what you're trying to get them to find out from them.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because it opens this new dynamic where there is a temptation to be able to want to change things on the fly, because you can, because it is possible with a natural language prompt. You can, remove these obstacles.
Yeah.
Right. And so I guess from that, I can take away that, that you still need to apply kind of the traditional research rigor to your approach to testing these prototypes. And just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's, well, I mean, I think we'll talk a little bit about this later, but it's definitely we're going to see a lot of prototypes in the next few years.
Yeah.
I saw a talk recently, and there was a product leader from a travel business, and they had built this kind of sandbox where anyone in the company could propose a prototype, and it was built in real time from Figma and based on sort of fairly live customer data. And she showed it on screen, which is very nice of her, but there was 400 prototypes in there. And so it's just like, how are you going to decide which one you're going to take forward? It's like, what's the prioritization? So that still just goes back to the sort of human problems that we've always had around deciding what to work on next.
Yeah, there's a proliferation of ideas. And I mean, to that point, in this particular e-commerce company, you spoke about communicating with the other stakeholders and then them getting really excited about building this as a potentially sellable product. And then you're in this kind of internal advocacy role within this organization to speak about your prototype and present its relative benefits versus what is currently available, I'm guessing. But how do you think about that stakeholder engagement when you've produced a prototype and you're almost needing to convince folks that this is a representation of the prior research stages, or this is worth testing with customers?
Yeah, well, I think that the realer it feels to the stakeholders, definitely people struggle to read wireframes. If you're not someone who looks at wireframes all the time, then it's hard to sort of picture what that's going to look like. So now that we can sort of plug in live data from discovery and actually display that these are the certain pain points that someone had along their journey, and now we're flipping it around, and these are solutions that are connected with those pain points that we've already validated. Then it's just easier to sort of create that paper trail between the solution we're proposing and the original data.
Yes, that makes sense. And so this is here because of this. Yeah, that's still important, isn't it? Yeah, and I think Max makes an interesting point in the chat, and he says it gets really easy to create ideas that are too far removed from engineering feasibility when you make rapid prototypes as well. And that speaks to that exact point. It's like you still need justification for the prototype ideas and some sort of grounding in reality that, hey, this is going to be something that is feasible, possible within the current sprint and meets the business objectives in the following ways. And that connection to the business objectives is as or more important than it has ever been in a world in which you can progress really fast. And I often think about this. It's like, in a world in which you can move fast, if you're, are you familiar with the 60 and 1 analogy? And it's a flight analogy, and it's if for every 1 degree that you're off course, every 60 miles you travel, you'll be 1 mile away from your intended landing spot. And so these kind of minor adjustments that you make in order to stay on course are really important in a world in which you can be progressing very quickly in a particular direction. So making sure that you're coming back to stakeholders, reconnecting it to the business objectives, regrounding it in what is possible for the product and engineering teams feels more important now than it did previously. So really promoting those stakeholder management aspects of the researcher's role.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Right. And so, I mean, maybe we can speak to some of those skills a little bit more. So I've just been talking about kind of stakeholder management and the needs there, but you're coming from quite an interesting background in that you've got a bit of a design background, and you've worked with a lot of different organizations, and so you've probably developed a pretty decent sense of taste around what a good website or experience looks like for folks. But how do people like me develop that skill of refined taste, I guess? And there's a lot of conversation online around taste being the new differentiator, and I think that that's true for researchers as well. How would I go about developing taste in inverted commas?
Yeah, I mean, I think this. I don't think this has actually changed as much as we think. I think that researchers have always benefited from having design skills training, just making good slides, or if you're trying to visualize your findings in a bespoke way, creating a new framework or combining the best parts of existing frameworks, that's something that just requires a visual mindset and practice. And so I think that's always been the case. And now I guess we don't have to learn Figma or tools. We can slightly shortcut that, but actually we still need to know what looks good or what looks finished, and having a sense of like that is real enough. That website has nothing jarring on it that makes it look sketchy, and so therefore it's sort of good enough to put in front of people, and they're not going to be distracted by the fact that it's not been designed by like a proper designer. And so I think that's sort of the level that I think is really helpful to get to. But also things like there's a technical side, which is understanding how things are built. I always think that's always been important, because exactly what Max is saying about sort of feasibility, just having a sort of general concept of what's possible and what the architecture of things are under the hood means that you can have more meaningful conversations with technical stakeholders. And now it means that when you're prototyping, you have an understanding of what does it mean, what's GitHub, what are we deploying, like why is CSS in a different file, like these kinds of things that are just unknown unknowns to people who haven't dabbled with that stuff. So I think there's design, there's understanding broadly how things are made, and then I also just think there's that startup mentality of whatever kind of teaching yourself new stuff is more and more essential. So a lot of people are editing videos now, making content and things like that. That just, you have to just learn video editing now and people don't watch long recordings. So as a researcher making shorter videos, snippets, it's very powerful if you can make a good video, show reel. And so we've had to learn video editing. So I think it's just another tool in the palette. And then when going back to sort of the taste point, we have a sense of what can we show a participant that's going to elicit a certain response that gives us confidence, and that taste has always been here, and it's still useful because you know what's important in the prototype, what you're showing, what you're not showing, what you're emphasizing, what you're directing them towards, so that you can uncover that insight about whatever it is you're trying to find out, whether it's price or navigation or something else.
Yeah. So I think that there are a couple of interesting points there. And one is around, the emphasis or what it is that you're trying to really test within the prototype. And oftentimes, certainly in my practice, I've found that it would be helpful to go to the polls of, what an extreme version of this might look like in order to kind of get a bit of a response there. But to your point around skills development, we've really been talking today about, the production of designs in the context of prototype development and what a good prototype looks like. But you've just touched on a technical element that I think is worth digging into for a moment, which is around engineering, because previously UX researchers would, interface with engineering via a product manager. And, I think that that's probably still the case for a lot of the folks on the call today. But you've also mentioned working in Claude Code as opposed to co-work. And so what did your learning journey look like in order to be able to get over that hump or that hill, and so that you could speak more eloquently to engineers about the constraints and the complexity of the prototypes that you were building?
Yeah, I mean, I've always worked quite closely with engineers, especially in my startup days. I was working in a B2B fintech, and then an AI startup before it was cool, back when we used to call it machine learning.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And so I was sitting next to the engineers, and a lot of the time, because it was new stuff that we were working on, and because these were sort of venture-backed startups, a lot of the time we weren't sure if it was even going to be technically possible, and so we were always, what we were testing was always sort of limited by the tech, and so it was a constant dialogue, and sometimes it was things were being unlocked by a new capability. There's kind of always that kind of ongoing dialogue that with technical people, and then I guess more recently with Claude Code, I was a bit afraid of it, especially all the demos of Claude Code are in the terminal, and it's like it's all like matrix and like that's like white on black, and like when people have their monitor at portrait mode because they're coders and stuff, and it's just like, but actually the first use of Claude Code in our organization was it's just purely on a massive bunch of markdown files that we have assembled, and it was just a step up from Claude projects. So we were essentially just going, Claude projects, they're kind of sluggish, and it's cool that they can read our Google Docs, and it's cool that they can have instructions, but it still feels a bit kind of heavy, and we don't have that much control. And so why don't we just move it over to we were using Obsidian, so let's move a lot of our project files, planning files, discussion guides, etc., into this environment, and then use Claude Code to sort of make sense of it and organize it. And we're doing another project, and it's this kind of e-commerce, but actually we can reuse the script from that last one. So take that and then learn from it, and then make a script, and then I'll tell you why it's wrong. And so that got me over the hump. And I realized you don't have to be writing code to be using Claude Code, and it feels, I don't know if it's true, but it feels a lot leaner than doing it in projects. It feels like you're wasting less credits on kind of going into unlocking Google Drive and things like that. So I think that got me into it, and then just naturally starting to dabble with actually sort of coding prototypes once I was in there, and it was all, none of it was in the terminal. It's always been in the either in the chat desktop interface app. On in the desktop app, or in there's, what's it called, VS Code.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Really interesting. And I think that oftentimes, certainly my mental model around using Claude Code, which I do regularly, is a way to interact and learn from our customer data. But you just mentioned learning from the research data, so things like discussion guides and learnings, and output templates and things of that nature. And so having those available as a resource to speed up some of the more manual processes associated with the research workflow are really interesting. And so are there primitives that exist for you in the research workflow? Do you have kind of a discussion guide primitive from which you base future versions, or how do you think about kind of the library and storage elements?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do. If it's definitely like that, there's a sort of old analogy of treating AI like a junior employee, or my analogy of treating them like a useless cousin. You say to them, like, we're doing a new project, and I want you to help on that project. And so probably the best place for you to start is to go and look at these other 3 projects that we did a few years ago that are quite similar, and then copy and paste from there, and then create your research plan or your discussion guide or your recruitment profile from there. And AI is actually a much better copy and paster than a human because it changes all it doesn't miss anything. And if you put it in tight guide rails, it essentially just takes something previous and then changes the subject. So we go from one type of, from travel to something else. But actually, you're just it's a much smarter copy and paste. And so that's what we've been doing, kind of on an industrial scale.
I think that's really interesting. And for me, it also opens up opportunities to scale individuals' research practice. And so if you spend as much time building kind of the guardrails around, hey, here is what non-researchers should be testing when they are doing research. Here is what a good discussion guide looks like. Here is how to set up a prototype. Here are some recruitment briefs that you should be leaning upon. And if they're accessible from a centralized repository for folks, you can almost begin to scale your research practice through the creation of these different guardrails as well. So I think that, making your knowledge more accessible is an interesting application.
Yeah, and you can give infinite amounts of feedback to Claude Code without it, calling HR and saying that you're constantly critical of it, and actually then it can make sense of that feedback, and it can turn into quite a coherent kind of playbook, which is human readable. And so its own instructions actually become great instructions for a person that's doing the same thing. And it sort of is slightly less passive aggressive maybe than me giving that feedback as well.
Yeah. And you can, this is what the machine said. This was all a machine, whereas Austin says, you can create these precedents and Claude skills and have a very heavy hand in the creation of those, but be able to create distance between yourself and the recommendations. Thank you, Claude, for that stakeholder management. It's fantastic. And so working through this, and so we've got, founders and PMs, and we've spoken a lot about researchers creating design prototypes. But what about when the shoe's on the other foot and we've got designers doing research? And, we've touched on that a little bit in terms of the guardrails that we're discussing now. But where do you see your responsibility as a researcher to make sure that others are doing research in a way that is rigorous and will result in impactful findings that aren't driving the company in an potentially incorrect direction?
Well, I think as a consultant, I don't have a huge amount of responsibility for that.
That's nice. That's nice.
So, and I also don't have a huge amount of experience of being in-house and sort of dealing with that issue. So I sort of tread carefully with how I answer that, but I think it's probably a better way of looking at it is if other people are doing their own research or building their own prototypes and trying to get them tested. It's important to sort of understand why they are doing that. What are they feeling what needs are not being met for them, and it just comes back to the same kind of skills that we've always needed of listening to stakeholders and sort of understanding, being a bit of a whisperer to that designer, CEO, product manager, and trying to understand what it is that's kind of going on. Why do they feel that they're not being heard? Why do they feel like things aren't moving fast enough? And maybe there's some clues in there about what they're actually trying to get done, and maybe they have a vision that we should be listened to.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had a good analogy before the call about an L-shaped sofa, didn't you? And I think that and so maybe you could talk through that one. And I think that the important point is that as researchers or people who are interested in speaking with customers or builders, as we are increasingly becoming, we need to continue to be blessed with that sense of curiosity to better understand why the prototype has been developed in the way that it has, to unpick and establish it. And so, yeah, maybe you could just talk about the
Yeah.
L-shaped sofa
Yeah.
example.
Well, I don't know if anyone's bought an L-shaped sofa. Maybe you can put your hand up in the chat if you have. But
Yeah.
the if you live in, I live in London. We have very small flats and property here, and so, but I'm an optimistic person. So when I measure my room, my living room, and then I start shopping for L-shaped sofas, in my sketch, the sofa takes up a lot less space in the room than the reality. And I have lived with a beautiful grey sofa from made.com, and like stubbed my toe on the L, and I tripped over it and always had to sort of walk around. Yes, good, Austin. Yeah. Thanks for that hindsight there. And so, but I think that sketch, it is a bit like a kind of a product vision in your mind. It can make a lot of sense. Like this will work, this will fit. But actually, when you're forced to actually put something down on paper, and even better, actually prototype it, then you start to see that certain parts of it aren't physically possible, or the architecture is too unwieldy, or we can't sort of jump from here to here. And so actually sort of prototyping and this higher fidelity prototyping, which is now possible, is a way of getting this information, getting this vision out of the heads of leaders, and along the way forcing them to sort of make trade-offs and understand, and then they're not kind of describing something in words or in a sort of abstract sketch on a whiteboard. They actually can show you the thing that they want to do, and you can ask questions about it. And there's this concept of boundary objects where if you criticize a picture or a prototype or a mock-up, then you're not criticizing the person, you're just criticizing this object. And then you can discuss, how would we change that? What would make this object better? Whereas if someone's describing their idea just in words and you criticize the idea, then it does feel like it's an attack on that person and that they're not being listened to. So I see prototypes as a really wonderful sort of boundary object that more and more people can engage with, and actually it should lead to better, more concrete conversations, and we just need to improve our skills at sort of navigating those and pushing back in the right places.
Yeah, love that concept. And so you're able to discuss something that's exterior to the individual's ideas. Really interesting. And so we've got 8 minutes left. My screen reliably tells me, but as a last question for today before we turn over to some Q&A, so please everybody enter your questions in the chat for Andrew. How do people get started with this? And what are some of the learnings that you're getting from the masterclasses that you're now running on this topic in particular in London? And how are those going?
Yeah, so yes, we are running masterclasses in London about once a month, and we will be moving them online later. So keep an eye out for that. I think that there's a few things that have come out. One is that we shouldn't just because we can make UI prototypes doesn't mean a UI prototype is what you need to test right now. And there's actually there's a lot with AI now that we can use to validate value propositions and so to really sort of understand, is this a good idea that we're building? Do they have a need for this? And actually, maybe we should be showing the customer a storyboard or a page out of a calendar or something that's a bit more sort of abstract to get to sort of really get a deeper understanding of the problem from their side, or a sort of high level representation of what it might feel like to have a subscription or to use a solution in this area. So there's a lot more that we can do if we're creative about what we consider to be prototype. And a lot of the time, we misconstrue people being able to use something as people needing it. And so I think that it's important to not jump into UI too quickly. And then I think that the advice for people, if they want to get going on this, is to have a go at rebuilding your website, your client's website, or competitor's website on Claude Code or Replit, Lovable, and see how it goes. Just ask it for advice on how to do it, and then get it going. You'll find very mixed results, and you'll find quite a lot of hand-holding is needed, but it gives you a really great, it's a great brief because it's a very closed brief, and you can see if you got it right or not, and then it really gives you a feeling for how these tools work, and what their strengths and weaknesses are. So I think that's a good place to get started.
Yeah, it's a fantastic idea. And I mean, we at Great Question are still working with people who don't have access to AI tools within their work environments. And then we have extremely AI native researchers who are working exclusively out of the terminal and conducting research from within Claude Code, sending out screeners and running interviews and setting up surveys. And so we really do see that full spectrum. And I think what I really like about that brief is that you don't need internal company access in order to be able to start working with these AI tools. You can do it on a personal account that you can sign up for today after work. So absolutely love that. So we do have a couple of minutes left. Andrew, is there any other final thoughts that you have before we wrap up today's call? Anything else any words of wisdom or advice for folks thinking about these prototype tests and the future of research, really? Just a big question to finish with. Yeah, just the future, the future of research. Yeah,
just 10 words. 10 words on the future of research.
2 minutes. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, one of the thoughts I was having while preparing for this was just thinking about what if in the middle of your call, your prototype is modifying itself. So you do a discovery interview, and the front half of that interview is you're learning more about that person and their life and the journey, et cetera, and then that transcript is then feeding a prototype that's adapting itself to sort of meet those needs, and so which even more of a kind of blurring line of that appears to be the way things, hyper personalization is a direction where things are going now, enabled by AI. So I wonder if the same analogy can be applied or should be applied to to prototyping and in real time.
Yeah, that is interesting, and a new class of research rigor that would need to be applied to that process, to the point that you addressed and the question that Max raised earlier regarding, when is it appropriate to start changing your prototypes, and in a world in which it's entirely adaptive, because that is going to be reflective of how individuals are interacting with, our customers' websites and client websites online. It becomes a lot more difficult to create rigid rules and outcomes and insights about an individual's experience in that particular environment, because everything is so unique and different. I certainly don't have the answers, but I'm glad that you're thinking about it and working on it.
I'm thinking about it. I definitely don't have the answer either.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Andrew. Really great to catch up and hear your thoughts and learn a little bit more about your practice. As mentioned at the top of the call, Great Question is an all-in-one UX research tool. So if you're not familiar with us, please take a moment to check out our website. And Andrew is also running masterclasses. I believe Carly might have put that in the channel. Yes, thank you. And so please connect with Andrew on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in learning more about the masterclasses, you can find out information there.
Yeah, right. There they are. Come on down.
Come on down. Anything to add on those masterclasses, Andrew? When's the next one?
The next one is 11th of June, and it's actually on qualitative price research, which is quite an interesting one. Most people do price research in a quantitative way, but actually we've been finding that there's a need for qualitative price research when you don't have huge numbers of customers that you can survey, or if what you're testing, what you're building is brand new, then you can't just run a survey and say, how much would you pay for this? You need to actually sort of do a bit more contextual thinking to understand the value of things. And so, yeah, quite a useful masterclass for lots of different roles, in whether that's researchers, product people, or marketing people.
Interesting.
So, link
and Emma's just saying that there's not found, but this one worked for me, Emma.
Yeah, the latest one. I think the one in the long chat had a little trailing and on it that just caught on the end. So if you take the and off masterclasses, you should be golden.
Fantastic. And maybe we can have you back on to speak about qualitative pricing next time, Andrew. But with that, we'll wrap up today's session. And thank you, everybody.
How much would that be worth to you? What would be a reasonable price to pay?
We'll have to figure that out next time. But thank you, everybody. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you may be around the world. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.